My name is Emma Carter, and I was 25 years old the year my best friend decided my postpartum depression was less important than her wedding centerpieces. 3 months after giving birth to my first daughter, I sat in my living room surrounded by dirty bottles, unfolded laundry, and the crushing weight of anxiety I couldn't explain to anyone. Meanwhile, my best friend, Kate Morrison, was planning the wedding of her dreams. For years, we'd been inseparable. The kind of friends who finished each other's sentences. The kind of friends who called each other sisters. The kind of friends who promised we'd be standing beside each other on the biggest days of our lives. So when Kate asked me to be her maid of honor, I said yes without hesitation. What I didn't realize was that motherhood was about to become the hardest thing I'd ever done. My daughter rarely slept. I was exhausted. I was breastfeeding around the clock. I cried in the shower where nobody could hear me. And every day felt like I was barely keeping my head above water. But I still tried. I went dress shopping. I attended fittings. I answered late-night wedding calls. I listened to endless conversations about flowers, venues, decorations, and guest lists. Whenever Kate needed me, I showed up. Not perfectly, but honestly. The first crack appeared when I started telling her the truth. She was drowning herself in wedding stress. Every week she added another DIY project. Another expense. Another responsibility. Another thing that absolutely had to be perfect. I gently suggested she slow down. She didn't appreciate that. "It's my wedding," she snapped. "I'll do whatever I want." I should have recognized the warning sign. Because after that, every time I couldn't give her exactly what she wanted, I could feel her disappointment growing. What she saw as lack of effort, I experienced as survival. Then one evening, 6 months postpartum, Kate and her fiancé Alex came to my house. I thought they wanted to discuss wedding details. Instead, they sat me down in my own living room and informed me I was no longer maid of honor. And just like that, the friendship I thought would last forever began falling apart. Welcome to dramatic revenge. I remember every detail of that evening. The sun was setting outside. My daughter was finally asleep after hours of fussing. And across from me sat 2 people I considered family. Kate folded her hands together and avoided eye contact. Alex stared at the floor. The tension in the room was so thick I could almost taste it. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then Kate finally broke the silence. "Emma, I don't think you're able to fulfill the responsibilities of maid of honor." At first, I genuinely thought she was joking. I even laughed nervously. But nobody else laughed. My smile disappeared. "What do you mean?" I asked. Kate took a deep breath. "You haven't been as involved as I expected." I stared at her. My brain struggled to process what I was hearing. Not involved. Over the previous months, I had attended wedding dress appointments, bridesmaid shopping trips, vendor discussions, planning calls, countless late-night conversations. I had done all of that while battling postpartum anxiety and taking care of a newborn. But somehow it wasn't enough. Kate continued. "I need someone who can fully commit." The words felt like a punch to the stomach. I looked at Alex. Surely he understood. Surely he would say something. Instead, he remained silent. I felt tears forming in my eyes. "I told you before choosing me that I was about to have a baby," I said quietly. "I even suggested your other friend should be maid of honor." Kate nodded. I know. The answer made everything worse. Because it meant she had known exactly what she was signing up for. Yet she still expected me to perform as if I wasn't recovering from childbirth. As if I wasn't sleep-deprived. As if I wasn't struggling every single day just to function. I tried one last time. "What if we split some of the responsibilities among the bridesmaids?" Kate immediately shook her head. "No. If they're doing the maid of honor work, then one of them should be maid of honor." The room fell silent, and suddenly I understood. This wasn't really about responsibilities. It wasn't about vendor meetings. It wasn't about wedding planning. Kate wanted a version of me that no longer existed. The carefree friend who had unlimited time, unlimited energy, unlimited availability. But I wasn't that person anymore. I was a mother, and motherhood had changed everything. A few minutes later, the conversation ended. The title was gone. The friendship was damaged. And the worst part, neither Kate nor Alex seemed to understand why I was devastated. To them, they had simply solved a wedding problem. To me, they had abandoned me during one of the most vulnerable periods of my life. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of the betrayal. After Kate and Alex left that night, I sat on the couch staring at the front door long after it had closed. My daughter was sleeping peacefully upstairs. The house was quiet, but inside my head, everything was chaos. I kept replaying the conversation. Every word, every expression, every moment. Part of me wondered if I had somehow failed. Maybe I should have pushed myself harder. Maybe I should have attended more meetings. Maybe I should have ignored my exhaustion. Maybe I should have been a better friend. Then my husband, Ryan, sat beside me. He had remained mostly silent during the conversation, choosing to let me speak for myself. But now he looked furious. Not annoyed. Not disappointed. Furious. "You did nothing wrong," he said. The certainty in his voice caught me off guard. I shook my head. "They wouldn't have removed me if I hadn't messed something up." Ryan immediately disagreed. "No, they removed you because they expected more from you than was reasonable." I looked down at my hands. The tears finally came. For months I had been trying to be everything for everyone. A good mother, a good employee, a good wife, a good friend. And somehow I still felt like I was failing. Ryan pulled me into a hug. "You've been surviving on 3 hours of sleep. You've been dealing with anxiety. You've been taking care of our daughter. And somehow they expected wedding planning to be your priority." Hearing someone finally say it out loud felt like breathing after being underwater. For the first time, I allowed myself to acknowledge how exhausted I truly was. The next day, Ryan made a decision that shocked everyone. He called Alex, and he stepped down as best man. Alex was stunned. Ryan explained exactly why. "If Emma isn't being treated with understanding and respect, I don't feel comfortable standing beside you at the wedding." The fallout was immediate. Kate was furious. Alex was frustrated. Mutual friends started hearing different versions of the story. Some people thought Ryan was overreacting. Others quietly admitted they understood why he felt the way he did. For weeks, the tension hung over everything. Group chats became awkward. Invitations stopped. Conversations grew shorter. The friendship group that had once felt like family suddenly felt divided. Still, Ryan never wavered. He saw what I was going through every day. He saw the panic attacks, the sleepless nights, the moments I broke down crying because I couldn't figure out why I felt so overwhelmed. And unlike Kate, he never expected me to simply push through it. Months passed. The wedding drew closer. And despite everything that had happened, I found myself missing my friends. Not the drama, not the conflict, the friendship. I missed movie nights, game nights, random text messages, the easy laughter we used to share. That's when Ryan and I made a decision. Maybe there was still a chance to fix things. Maybe all of us had been hurt. Maybe if we sat down together, we could finally clear the air. What happened next would convince me that Kate and Alex weren't interested in reconciliation. They were interested in winning. 2 months before the wedding, Ryan and I reached out. Not because we thought we were wrong. Not because we owed anyone an apology. But because we genuinely cared about Alex. He had been our friend for years. And despite everything that had happened, we wanted to support him on one of the biggest days of his life. When Alex agreed to meet, I felt hopeful for the first time in months. Maybe this was finally the conversation we needed. Maybe everyone had cooled down. Maybe we could put the wedding drama behind us. We met at a small coffee shop halfway between our homes. The atmosphere was polite but uncomfortable. Like 4 people pretending everything was normal when it clearly wasn't. For the first few minutes, nobody mentioned the obvious. We talked about work, the wedding, the weather, anything except the giant elephant sitting at the table. Eventually, Alex broke the silence. "I think we should move forward." The words sounded encouraging, until I realized what he actually meant. Moving forward didn't include discussing what happened. It didn't include acknowledging my postpartum struggles. It didn't include talking about how hurt I felt after being removed as Maid of Honor. It simply meant everyone pretending the problem no longer existed. Kate barely spoke. When she did, her answers were short, careful, controlled, almost rehearsed. The more we talked, the more I realized she wasn't interested in understanding my perspective. In her mind, the situation was simple. She needed a maid of honor. I failed to meet her expectations. End of story. There was no room for nuance. No room for postpartum anxiety. No room for exhaustion. No room for the reality of caring for an infant. Only expectations. And disappointment. Still, Ryan and I tried to keep the peace. By the end of the meeting, Alex asked Ryan if he would consider returning as best man. I was surprised. very surprised. Because if the problem was supposedly our behavior during the wedding planning process, why was Ryan being welcomed back so easily? The answer seemed obvious. The issue was never really with Ryan. It was with me. Ryan looked at me before answering. Then he nodded. If we're all trying to move forward, I'll do it. Alex smiled. Kate didn't. I noticed it immediately. Something about her expression felt unfinished. Like someone agreeing to a ceasefire while still preparing for another battle. But I ignored the feeling. I wanted peace. I wanted normal. I wanted to believe the worst was behind us. A few weeks later, the wedding arrived. I attended as a guest. Ryan stood beside Alex's best man. The ceremony was beautiful. The reception was fun. Everyone smiled. Everyone laughed. Everyone acted like the past few months had never happened. And for a while, I convinced myself that maybe things really were getting better. After the wedding, we even started hanging out again. Not constantly, but enough to feel hopeful. Game nights returned. Occasional visits resumed. Conversations became easier. Months passed. Then almost a year passed. Slowly, I stopped thinking about the Maid of Honor drama altogether. I believed we had survived it. I believed the friendship had healed. I believed we were finally moving forward. I had no idea that while I was rebuilding the friendship, Kate was quietly holding onto every ounce of resentment. And one day, out of nowhere, she was going to make sure I knew it. For almost a year after the wedding, life felt normal again. Not perfect, but normal. Ryan and I would occasionally invite Kate and Alex over. Sometimes they came together. Sometimes only Alex showed up. When Kate wasn't there always seemed to be a reason. She's working. She's tired. She picked up another shift. She's busy. At the time, I believed it. Her new job had demanding hours. Everyone knew that. So when her texts became shorter, I didn't take it personally. When replies took days instead of minutes, I assumed she was overwhelmed. When entire conversations died halfway through, I told myself she was exhausted. I gave her every benefit of the doubt, because that's what friends do. At least that's what I thought. Meanwhile, Alex continued acting friendly. He would stop by, talk with Ryan, ask about our daughter, discuss projects and hobbies. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing suggested that another storm was brewing beneath the surface. Then one evening, completely out of nowhere, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Kate. At first, I smiled. I thought maybe she was finally reaching out. Maybe she wanted to grab coffee. Maybe she wanted to reconnect. Instead, I read words that made my stomach drop. I don't forgive you, and I will never let you get that close to me again. That was it. No explanation. No context. No warning. Just 2 sentences that felt like a slap across the face. I stared at the screen, certain there had to be more. There wasn't. For several minutes, I simply sat there trying to understand what I had just read. The wedding. Was this about the wedding? After an entire year? After all the visits? After all the conversations? After acting like everything was fine? I immediately responded. Is everything okay? What is this about? Then I waited. An hour passed. Nothing. A day passed. Nothing. Several days passed. Still nothing. No explanation. No clarification. No response. The silence was almost worse than the message itself. Finally, frustrated and confused, I reached out to Alex. His answer only made things stranger. Apparently, Kate was still upset about the wedding. Apparently, during our reconciliation meeting before the wedding, there had been some understanding that I would eventually reach out again to discuss everything in more detail. I remembered agreeing that things weren't magically fixed, but I had absolutely no memory of being assigned some future follow-up conversation. And even if that had happened, how was I supposed to know it was still an issue if nobody ever told me? For an entire year, they had acted normal. For an entire year, they had accepted invitations. For an entire year, they had smiled, laughed, and socialized. Then suddenly I was being punished for not fixing a problem I didn't know still existed. I felt angry. Really angry. Not because Kate was hurt. People are allowed to be hurt. But because she had apparently spent months silently building resentment while giving me no opportunity to address it. And now, when I was finally trying to understand what was happening, she refused to communicate. The friendship was no longer suffering from wedding drama. It was suffering from something much worse. One person had decided to stop talking. And the more I tried to understand, the more doors slammed shut in my face. What happened next would push me to my breaking point. After Kate's message, I tried everything a reasonable person could try. I texted. I called. I reached out politely. I asked direct questions. I even apologized for any hurt I might have caused, despite still not fully understanding what I had supposedly done wrong. Nothing worked. Every attempt disappeared into silence. No response. No clarification. No conversation. Just an endless wall. The hardest part wasn't the anger. It was the confusion. You can't solve a problem when nobody will tell you what the problem is. You can't repair a friendship by yourself. And you certainly can't read someone's mind. For weeks, I replayed the entire friendship in my head. Every conversation. Every disagreement. Every wedding-related moment. I wondered if there was something obvious I had missed. Something everyone else could see except me. But every road led back to the same place. The wedding. The postpartum period. The maid of honor situation. Nothing else made sense. Meanwhile, Alex continued sending mixed messages. One day, he would say Kate needed time. The next, he would say we all needed to sit down and have an open conversation. Then when I tried arranging that conversation, nobody responded. It felt like being trapped in a maze where every exit led back to the beginning. Ryan watched me struggle through all of it. One evening, after another unanswered message, he finally said something that stuck with me. "Emma, you can't force someone to talk." I knew he was right, but accepting it was difficult. For most of my life, problems were solved through communication. You sat down. You talked. You listened. You disagreed. You worked through it. What I was experiencing now was something completely different. Kate wasn't fighting with me. She wasn't arguing with me. She wasn't even disagreeing with me. She had simply decided I no longer deserved a conversation. And somehow that hurt more than any argument ever could. The silence started affecting everything. Whenever my phone buzzed, my heart jumped. Whenever Ryan mentioned Alex, I felt anxious. Whenever someone brought up weddings, friendships, or motherhood, I found myself thinking about what had happened. The emotional weight was exhausting. One afternoon, while my daughter played on the living room floor, I caught myself staring into space, thinking about Kate. Again. And suddenly I became angry. Not furious. Not explosive. Just deeply tired. Tired of carrying a friendship that required me to do all the work. Tired of chasing people who didn't seem interested in being found. Tired of questioning my own memories and experiences. Tired of feeling guilty for surviving a postpartum period that had nearly broken me. That was the moment something shifted inside me. For over a year, I had been trying to prove that I was a good friend. Trying to prove that motherhood hadn't changed me. Trying to prove that I still deserved a place in people's lives. But maybe the real question wasn't whether I deserved their friendship. Maybe the real question was whether they deserved mine. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I stopped feeling desperate for answers. Because I was starting to realize something important. Sometimes the way people treat you during your hardest moments tells you everything you need to know about them, even if they never explain themselves. The next move, however, wouldn't come from me. It would come from Ryan, and it would force everyone to finally choose a side. By this point, Ryan had watched me spend months trying to fix a friendship that seemed determined to stay broken. He watched me send messages that went unanswered. He watched me question myself. He watched me carry guilt that wasn't entirely mine to carry. And eventually, he'd had enough. The opportunity came when Alex reached out to him. It wasn't about the friendship. It wasn't about resolving the conflict. It wasn't even about Kate. Alex wanted Ryan's help with a project. Something mechanical they had worked on together before. Under normal circumstances, Ryan would have agreed immediately. The two of them had always enjoyed building things together. But this time was different. Ryan looked at the message. Then he looked at me. And for a long moment, he said nothing. Finally, he replied, "Before we do that, you and Kate need to talk to Emma about what happened." It wasn't rude. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't an ultimatum. It was simply a boundary. And apparently, Alex agreed. At least at first. According to him, everyone needed to have an open conversation. Everyone needed to clear the air. Everyone needed to move forward. For the first time in months, I felt hopeful. Maybe this was finally it. Maybe we were finally going to sit down and discuss everything honestly. Maybe all the confusion would finally make sense. So I reached out. Directly. Politely. I asked Alex if we could arrange a conversation soon. Nothing dramatic. Nothing confrontational. just a chance to talk. The message sat unopened. One day passed. Then another. Then another. Eventually, Ryan suggested I send a text instead. So I did. This time I received a response. But it wasn't the response I expected. Apparently, they were too busy that weekend. They would need to find another time. Under normal circumstances, that would have been perfectly reasonable. The problem was that this had become a pattern. Every time a conversation was possible, something seemed to get in the way. A schedule conflict. Work. Life. Timing. Always something. Never a solution. Still, I tried to be accommodating. I explained that Ryan and I were available during the week. I suggested several options. I pointed out that both families had busy schedules for the next month, and that sooner would probably be easier than later. Then I waited. Again. And once again, silence arrived before any answers did. Days passed. Nothing. No follow-up. No proposed date. No effort. No conversation. Just more silence. At that point, I realized something that should have been obvious much earlier. People who genuinely want resolution don't keep postponing it. They don't keep avoiding it. They don't keep creating obstacles every time a solution appears. They find a way. Especially when the issue supposedly matters as much as they claim it does. What hurt most wasn't that Kate was still angry. It wasn't even that Alex kept taking her side. It was the realization that neither of them seemed interested in understanding mine. They wanted me to acknowledge their pain, but they had no interest in acknowledging mine. The postpartum anxiety, the sleepless nights, the exhaustion, the humiliation of being removed as maid of honor, the year of confusion that followed. None of it seemed to matter. Their hurt was valid. Mine was inconvenient. And the more I thought about it, the clearer everything became. This was no longer a misunderstanding. This was a choice. A choice they were making over and over again. The choice not to communicate. The choice not to listen. The choice not to repair. And once I understood that, something surprising happened. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I stopped waiting for them to call. Because deep down, I already knew what their silence was saying. For a long time, I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Kate was overwhelmed. Maybe Alex was caught in the middle. Maybe everyone was struggling to find the right words. Maybe the friendship could still be saved. But eventually, all the excuses ran out. And when they did, I was left with a truth I didn't want to face. Kate had never forgiven me. Not after the Maid of Honor situation. Not after the wedding. Not after the months of pretending everything was okay. Not after all the visits and conversations that followed. The friendship I thought we were rebuilding had only been real on one side. Mine. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. The delayed responses. The canceled plans. The emotional distance. The way every interaction felt slightly different after the wedding. I had ignored those signs because I wanted to believe the best. Because that's what friends do. But friendship requires 2 people. And somewhere along the way, Kate had quietly checked out. What hurt most wasn't losing her. It was realizing how long I had been grieving someone who was standing right in front of me. One evening, after putting my daughter to bed, I sat alone on the couch thinking about the woman I had been during those postpartum months. I remembered how scared I was, how exhausted I was, how often I felt like I was failing. I remembered crying while washing bottles, crying while folding laundry, crying for reasons I couldn't even explain. And suddenly, I saw the entire situation differently. Instead of asking why I wasn't a better maid of honor, I started asking why my best friend wasn't a better friend. Why was so much grace expected from me, but so little offered in return? Why was I expected to understand her wedding stress, while she refused to understand my postpartum struggles? Why did her disappointment matter more than my well-being? The answers weren't complicated. They were just painful. Because real friendship doesn't disappear the moment life becomes inconvenient. Real friendship adapts. Real friendship makes room for difficult seasons. Real friendship says, I know you're struggling. How can I help? It doesn't say, you're not meeting my expectations. The more I thought about it, the clearer things became. Kate had viewed my limitations as a personal failure. I had viewed them as a temporary consequence of becoming a mother. We were operating from completely different realities. And no amount of texting was ever going to bridge that gap. That realization brought something unexpected. Peace. Not complete peace. Not instant healing. But enough peace to stop blaming myself. Enough peace to stop replaying every conversation. Enough peace to stop wondering whether I was the villain in someone else's story. Because maybe I wasn't. Maybe I was simply a new mother doing her best. And maybe that should have been enough. For the first time since receiving Kate's message, I slept well. Not because the problem had been solved, but because I finally understood that some people create distance long before they admit it. And when they do, there's nothing you can do except stop chasing them. What I didn't know then was that one final conversation was still waiting for me. A conversation that would bring this entire chapter of my life to a close. A few weeks later, Alex finally called. Not a text. Not a message through someone else. An actual phone call. I almost didn't answer. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure there was anything left to say. But curiosity got the better of me. So I picked up. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Alex sighed. A long, tired sigh. The kind people make when they've been carrying something for too long. Emma, he said quietly, I don't think this friendship is ever going back to what it was. Strangely, hearing those words didn't hurt. Not anymore. Because deep down, I had already accepted them. I asked him a simple question. Why? There was another pause. Then came the answer. Not an explanation. Not accountability. Just his version of the story. Kate had felt abandoned. Kate had expected more support. Kate had never gotten over being disappointed. Kate had struggled to trust me after the wedding. Everything came back to Kate's feelings. I listened. Patiently. Without interrupting. When he finished, I asked something he clearly wasn't expecting. What about my feelings? Silence. For the first time in the entire conversation, Alex didn't have an answer. So I continued. I talked about postpartum anxiety, the sleepless nights, the fear, the exhaustion, the shame of feeling like I wasn't enough. I talked about being removed as maid of honor while trying to survive one of the hardest seasons of my life. I talked about spending a year believing our friendship was healing only to discover resentment had been quietly growing the entire time. And then I asked the question that had been sitting in my heart for months. Did either of you ever stop to ask if I was okay? Another silence. Longer this time. Because the answer was obvious. No, they hadn't. Not once. Not during the postpartum period. Not after removing me from the wedding role. Not after the friendship began falling apart. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. By the end, nobody was yelling. Nobody was angry. Nobody was even arguing anymore. Because there was nothing left to argue about. The truth had finally become clear. We had experienced the same events. But we had lived completely different stories. In theirs, I was the friend who let them down. In mine, they were the friends who abandoned me when I needed understanding most. Neither side was ever going to convince the other. And maybe that was okay. Before hanging up, Alex said something I'll never forget. I wish things had turned out differently. For the first time in a long time, I agreed. So do I. Then the call ended. And with it, so did the friendship. Not with shouting. Not with insults. Not with revenge. Just with acceptance. The kind that comes when you've finally exhausted every possible way to save something. As I sat there staring at my phone, I realized something surprising. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was free. For nearly 2 years, I had carried the weight of trying to fix something that required two people. Now I finally understood that I had done my part. And sometimes that's enough. The next morning, I woke up, made breakfast for my daughter, and started living a life that no longer revolved around waiting for someone else's forgiveness. Because the person I needed to forgive wasn't Kate. It was myself. The hardest lesson I learned from losing my best friend was this. Not every friendship survives every season of life. Some friendships are built for convenience. Others are built for celebration. Only a few are strong enough to survive hardship. When you're struggling, the people who truly care won't measure your worth by what you can do for them. They'll measure it by who you are. Postpartum mothers don't need perfection. They need compassion. New parents don't need more expectations. They need understanding. And friendships aren't tested when life is easy. They're tested when life becomes difficult. If someone only values you when you're useful, available, and meeting their expectations, then they don't truly value you. Real friends make room for your struggles. Real friends communicate honestly. Real friends don't punish you with silence. Most importantly, never spend years trying to earn forgiveness for surviving a difficult chapter of your life. You are allowed to be human. You are allowed to struggle. You are allowed to have limitations. And anyone who genuinely loves you will understand that. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop chasing people who have already decided to walk away. Because peace begins the moment you stop begging for a seat at a table where your presence was never fully appreciated. The moral of the story: the people who deserve a place in your life are the ones who stand beside you during your hardest seasons, not the ones who resent you for having them.